Hey, this is Brother Bill, and you're listening to the Wandering Buffalo podcast with your hosts, Andrew and Justin. Go Bills.
Bills Mafia, welcome into another episode of the Wandering Buffalo podcast, a show on the Built-in Buffalo Network. You can find us on YouTube, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, pretty much anywhere you search up the Wandering Buffalo, you can find me and my co-host Andrew. He has the night off, got stuck at work a little bit late. Still wanted to bring you an episode this week, so I will be riding solo today. Just wanted to kind of start off talk about a little Bills-related news. This time of the year is where we start getting into the first slow spot of the off-season, right? We're not quite to, the tampering period. Free agency hasn't fired up yet. So we're take these little tidbits of, coaching news and things as we go. And this one came out today. It was reported that the Buffalo Bills linebacker coach, Bob Babich, is going to be retiring. Nothing official here, but it looks like he's going to be retiring. And his son, Bobby Babich, who is currently the team's safeties coach, is going to be taking over that responsibilities. And hey, I'll tell you what, I don't know a ton about Bobby, but if he has anything to do with the way those safeties have been playing together over the last couple of years, I'm all for it. You kind of look at the Bills linebacking core, and we have, Matt Milano, obviously, was a converted safety, kind of that roaming the field space linebacker. And then you have just that athletic freak in Tremaine Edmonds. And, it kind of brings me to the first thing I want to talk about tonight. And that's just kind of this continuous but also new direction of the Bills as far as the coaching staff goes. And this, to me, is something that we've kind of been talking about for a couple of years. When your team starts having success and a guy like Brian Dable, a guy like Leslie Frazier are turning in these top units in the league, and, we're making some noise in the playoffs and making championship games, it's a natural trend in the league for these guys to get different opportunities. And I've talked about it on the show a couple times of kind of the mark of a good to great franchise is when you get to those points in the road, how you adjust to that, how you build from that going forward. And the Bills have made some pretty exciting moves, in my opinion, this offseason. And I think kind of where the coaching staff sits as of now, we have just a good blend of some youth and some experience, and we have some guys that were brought in from outside. We have other guys that were promoted from within, and there's something to be said for the continuity. And specifically here, I'm thinking about Ken Dorsey taking the reins as the offensive coordinator, and while I think that's great to have somebody that's been in the building who's been working with these players. Kind of seeing the day-to-day of what they're doing. But then also, there's the issue of he hasn't been a play caller. So you bring in Joe Brady, another younger guy from outside of the organization. And, it's still a guy that has called plays, so somebody to bounce ideas off of. So I think that kind of the changes that they're making due to, spots being open, it's not just this attack at getting all these young hotshot next guy names in there. There, to me, is a good blend of having that experience and having some youthfulness. One of the guys that they did bring in, he's a little bit older. I believe he's 54. Is Aaron Cromer, and has been discussed here. But I think that's something that really excites me to get a fresh set of eyes on, because Bobby Johnson was always a coach that I felt he was a pretty good coach. I had respect for him. But then we're kind of looking at the beginning of this past season and how much our line was struggling. And yes, towards the tail end of the season, they were coming along. But I don't think that it hurts in some of these spots to get a fresh set of eyes on it and kind of be able to dial up some different things. And, I'm looking at a guy like Cody Ford, and, we have the Wyatt Teller example that will always be in our back pocket of, was it kind of coaching, or did he just take a little bit longer to develop? And we'll never really know what the answer is there. But having some young pieces in the locker room on that offensive line right now, I'm intrigued to see what he does with, some of the steady starters, talking Mitch Morse, Deion Dawkins, but also, what kind of second year leap can we look for out of Spencer Brown? I'm guessing that, while the line was a little bit more stabilized towards the end of the season, we probably look to free agency in the draft to add a couple more pieces, in particular, on that interior offensive line where we had some struggles. And I think there's going to be a lot of question marks along that offensive line. We're talking, we do have free agents in Ike Boettger and Ryan Bates. I imagine they try to keep both of them around, but we're also kind of looking at Ike Boettger being an unrestricted free agent. So, does somebody swoop in and try to get him off the team? Looking at you, New York Giants, they have familiarity with the player, pretty suspect offensive line, and, that might be the kind of player that they look to be like, he might not be all pro every year, but we know he's a steady presence there. So let's kick the tires on that and kind of have him be the stopgap while we figure out the rest of it. I imagine Ryan Bates is back. But then I also look at a guy like Darrell Williams. We extended him to be that right tackle, and, he kicks inside and plays pretty well at guard. And, contract-wise, I don't think he's paid horribly unreasonably to be a starting guard in the NFL. But there's also some options built into his contract of, if we're looking to save some money and we think that we can get, some cheaper talent in there, maybe somebody younger through the draft, that could be an option. So I know I kind of started off here talking about the coaches, and I'm kind of on the offensive line now, but I think a lot of the coaching changes are going to be kind of make your own little tweaks, and all the infrastructure is kind of in place to run back what we did last year. And I think the offensive line is going to be an area where we might see a little bit more change than we expect. I don't expect Feliciano back. There's this constant kind of quiet chatter of, Mitch Morse being a big cap hit, and do we let him go? Personally, I'd be more in favor of moving some money around and extending Mitch a couple of years. I think he's a little bit underrated at the center position, considering kind of the idea of the line having to play as one unit and having these rotating pieces next to him. And, Ike Boettger gets shuffled into the game, and Cody Ford is in there next to him. And I feel like with continuity, with just slightly better play at the guard positions, Mitch Morse is still a very adequate center. So it's kind of my thoughts on the offensive line. We also had Matthew Smiley be promoted to the special teams coordinator, and this is a move that I don't know where I land on it. Overall, I feel like the Bills, for the past several seasons, which he was, a part of the coaching staff for, I feel like overall the special teams has been pretty good, and we get to a year like this past season, and I guess I ultimately don't know how much I can blame the coaching staff, and I know we can bring up the last 13 seconds of the Kansas City game, and that one's still fresh with us. But overall, for the body of work of the season, I feel like we had a lot of gaffes in the return games, but I don't know how much I put that on coaching versus the players going out and executing. I think there is definitely the benefit of having Andre Roberts doing the punt and kick return duties and his decision making and kind of leaving his explosive playability out of it. Because I think we had a couple guys back there this year in McKenzie and Stevenson that had that explosive play potential, but it's the little nuances of making sure you're protecting the ball and fielding punts cleanly and all that. And I feel like the biggest mistakes that we saw in special teams were more of poor decision making on the field and errors there. And I can't put that too much on the coaching staff. I do think the special teams has also benefited from the Bills as an organization making a conscious effort to have some of those guys that are special teams aces. We're talking Tywan Jones, Tyler Medikevich, some of the players like that. And I think that will be another interesting thing to look at this offseason of, some of those guys are we going to rework money? We just have a lot of money invested into the special teams. So, was the success that the special teams was having a product of just having those players or good coaching or kind of a combination of the two? And I feel like I would land in that category. And for the most part, if you take away some of the fielding and ball security errors on the team, which again, I have a hard time attributing just to coaching. I think if you just put somebody back there that's more sure-handed, like we saw Micah Hyde doing in the playoffs, I think we feel a lot differently about the special teams this year. And no, I don't want our plan in the future to be Micah Hyde returning kicks because we trust his hands back there. But I think that's a position that we kind of were looking at a lot last offseason, and we brought in players like Lance Lenore just kind of trying to cover that specific position. And I think that's, we talk about all the needs going into free agency in the draft, and we can talk about cornerback, we can talk offensive line, we can talk defensive end, defensive tackle. We have all of these needs that exist, but I think something that kind of goes underrated and something that we don't talk about enough is, whether it's one player or two, that the kick returning and punt returning duties. And I think that's a major thing that we have to look at this offseason and see how that shakes out. But overall, pretty excited with the direction of the coaching staff. Obviously, it's with having the playoff loss still in our minds and kind of seemingly being not only the last 13 seconds, but some questionable coaching decisions along the way. It's kind of weird to sit in this chair right now and look at small retoolings of the coaching staff and feel this confidence. And I think there are still question marks, but overall, I really like the blend that they've put together of experience and youth and kind of trying to get these next up-and-coming guys that will likely take, maybe we see Dorsey taking a head coaching job in 3-4 years, and if he has success with Josh Allen like Daboll did. And this is kind of the start of that Sean McDermott coaching tree, and we always talk about drafting and developing players, and I think this is kind of goes hand in hand with, you're not drafting the coaches, but bringing in that young talent and surrounding them with some veterans, just like you would do on the football field, and really grooming these coaches to be the best versions of themselves, like they're doing with the players. So I'm going to take a quick break. If you've been tuning in, we're doing the 13 Reasons Why series, 13 Reasons to be excited for next season. So we're going to take a quick break, and I'll jump back in with that for you.
Hey, this is Bills Vader. Now back to the show.
Welcome back into this episode of the Wandering Buffalo podcast, show on the Built-in Buffalo Network. I want to thank everybody for joining me tonight. Again, my name is Justin. I am your host tonight. My partner in crime, Andrew, has the night off. Just want to jump back in and get into our segment here that we've been doing weekly. And it's our 13 reasons why to be excited for the next season. So we've gone back and forth. Andrew talked last week about health overall being a reason to be excited for this team. And just kind of wanted to echo his statements there. I feel like the organization as a whole, they really reinvested into the training and rehab facilities, and there's a ton of luck that goes into the health of a football team, but I think there's also kind of the science backing it up, and I don't think it's a real mistake. And again, obviously we had the Trey White ACL this year, but I don't think it's a mistake that we haven't seen a ton of injuries like that and just rashes of injuries. Usually as we're getting, kind of halfway through the season, I'm pleasantly surprised to kind of look at our injury report for the week, and, we see 2-3 guys on there. There's the veteran rest. But kind of since we've reinvested into this health and wellness aspect of the team, I think we've been doing a really good job of not only kind of limiting injuries, but as they do pop up, and I know Andrew mentioned this last week, kind of the bringing players along at a healthier pace for them, so we're not seeing re-injuries. So for this week, I have one here that I debated for a while, and I decided to go with it. Feel free to hit us up on social media, leave a comment on the video if you disagree with me. But one of the reasons I'm excited for the team next year is the defensive line. And I kind of want to get into this with the asterisk of this kind of being a position where I could be very right or I could be very wrong. And I think there's a lot of pieces in play here that we just don't quite know about yet. And I'm kind of betting on progressions, which I know is not something you always want to do. But just looking at kind of some of the opportunities that we have there and some of the contracts that are up and just the opportunities that we're going to have to try something different. So one of the first guys I want to talk about is AJ Epinesa, and he's coming into that third year of a player that is kind of a guy that was a little rough around the edges, but we bet on the physical tools and the coaching staff and who the player is as a person. And we've seen year 3 be such a big year for so many of these players that we've brought in. And, we're talking Josh Allen, Dawson Knox, Ed Oliver came on this year, Taron Johnson. I mean, the list kind of goes on of these players that, looked a little rough in their first couple of years and then just kind of burst onto the scene. And I think AJ Epinesa is kind of next in line to do that, and we saw flashes of it this past season, and I know we can specifically talk about the game he played against the Dolphins, where he was just all over the place. For me, this past season, there wasn't enough of the consistency. But if you can even get 10-15% more of those flash plays, I think kind of with the progression of some of the other players and the fact that we like to run this rotation, that he could be a very effective player. And then opposite of him, kind of looking the youth aspect, Greg Rousseau. It was a pick in the draft last year that I was kind of back and forth on. And what I didn't really expect to see out of Greg Rousseau year one was kind of that high floor of being a run defender. And I think, not always having the splashiest plays and, rookie year double-digit sack numbers, I think he was quietly sneaky good for his rookie season. And we're talking a guy that had transitioned over to the position in college, 1 year starter. He took the 2020 year off for COVID, and kind of was coming into his rookie year being the first football that he's played in 2 years. So I was kind of expecting him to be more on the AJ Epinesa rookie year, kind of letting him dip his toes into the water. And he was thrust into a pretty considerable workload this year, and I think there's definitely some room for improvement, but I think the floor that we saw from him, it's an average starting NFL defensive end, but if he can keep working towards that ceiling, we might have really got somebody there. Talk about some of the other DNs. This is where some of the questions and opportunities come up for me. When you look at Jerry Hughes and Mario Addison, will one of them be back? Will they both be gone? I'm kind of leaning towards one of the two stays, and in my heart, it's got to be Jerry Hughes, right? The longest tenured Bill. Anybody who's been sticking around for his whole career throughout Buffalo knows, the Jerry Hughes we had at the beginning of the career. He was, taking bad penalties. He was a hothead. But when you look at his career with the Bills overall, he really turned into a very good player for us. He turned into just a great leader. And, in particular for being a player that we traded Kelvin Shepherd for. Kelvin Shepherd, he's already out of the league, and I believe he has a linebacking coach in Detroit, a linebacking coaching job in Detroit. So just kind of that longevity in the career that he was able to put together with the Bills. He's definitely a guy that, if we could rework the contract a little bit, maybe give him a couple of years, he's still a pretty effective pass rusher. Not necessarily getting the numbers in the sacks, but the pressure that he can bring after the quarterback to force them into decisions and maybe flush them into some of these other players that are blossoming. Thinking Ed Oliver, Greg Rousseau. I think he still has value to the team. And then Mario Addison, who was a guy that honestly I wasn't too keen on having around when we were talking about this last offseason. But what do I know? He ends up leading the team in sacks and kind of took on that veteran mentor job and, really working with these young guys. So, I mean, if you can work out the money and it makes sense, I'm really okay with one or both of them coming back at kind of a team-friendly deal. They're both up there in age. Jerry Hughes, I personally want to see retire with the Bills. So I think it'll be interesting to see what shakes out there. The interior of the defensive line, I guess this is where I would say we have some needs to address. But also looking at, Star Lotulelei, who, if he didn't get the massive contract that he got to come to Buffalo, I think we might all be a little bit more okay with that. But in particular with him having the opt-out year and that kind of not affecting contract status, it's kind of just another year where it kind of hurts us to get rid of him. So I think he probably sticks around, and in a reduced role, fine, I guess. But I think the guy that excites me here is Harrison Phillips, who I absolutely loved when we took Harrison Phillips in the draft. And not just who he is as a player, but who he is off the field. Just Walter Payton, Man of the Year nominee, finalist more than once, and just a seemingly great teammate, just an overall hard worker, and just battled some rough injuries and kind of getting right on the field. And in my opinion, towards the end of this, and I guess it happened on the field too, we saw him kind of eating away into Star's snaps and playing well as not just, that one tech, but he was really able to push the pocket. He was getting after the quarterback, kind of collapsing the pocket. And the next guy I want to talk about, Ed Oliver, they seem to really work well in tandem together. He's going to be Harrison Phillips will be an interesting one because his contract is up. So does he stick around? What does he cost on the market? Remains to be seen. But I think towards the end of the season he was really coming on strong, and the way that he was able to play next to Ed Oliver really seemed to open things up, and Ed Oliver really flourished throughout the full season. He had flashes, but I can't even count how many times we sat in on the show after the game. We're kind of like, man, it's not really in the stat sheet, but Ed Oliver was playing on fire again today. And I think that's kind of what you get out of Ed Oliver. And yes, I do think that we have seasons of Ed Oliver coming up where we might see like the 8 to 10 sack range, where he's just able to play a little bit more consistent with consistency next to him. But everything we were able to see from him at the end of the season, he was a guy that we had talked about that we really needed to see more from, and I think towards the end of the season he really started showing that. And we can sprinkle some other guys in here, F.A. Obata. He was injured, he was inactive, but in the snaps that he did get, I kind of like what he shows as a rotation piece. And there's a lot of talk about, will some of these defensive ends kind of reduce down to D tackle for pass rushing situations? And I think we saw that the most from him. And overall, in his limited snaps, I would say I'm pretty pleased with him, and I'd be glad to have him back. Boogie Basham, interesting case to me because he got more of that A.J. Epinesa treatment that I was expecting for Greg Rousseau this year. And he's, again, a player that, he had his weeks that he was inactive. He had weeks where he didn't really do much, but there's also some times where he was kind of popping off the screen. And I think of the idea of both him and Greg Rousseau and their pass rushing style, not necessarily just being like straight up beat you with speed and pass rush moves, but they're that kind of like, you get the quarterback 2-3 seconds in the pocket and they're just still grinding on your offensive linemen, and they work from whistle to whistle every play. So Basham is somebody I'm excited to see kind of with more snaps, another offseason of work, how these players get coached up. And, if we do lose a Mario Addison or a Jerry Hughes, those snaps got to go to somebody. And with the extra workload for Epinesa, Basham, Russo, like what do we see these players start developing into? Vernon Butler, he can go. I know he's kind of a guy that we bet on his draft pedigree, and maybe we can be the ones to resurrect his career. You're paying him a real contract, and seeing him inactive, I feel like it's the Trent Murphy move all over again, and I always kind of get the idea on paper because Brandon Beane likes to fill out his roster before he goes into the draft, so you're not just chasing need. So I understand the process, but I feel like it also has the ability to rope us into some suspect contracts that we have to deal with down the road. And then one of the other thing that I'm optimistic and hopeful with in this group is Brandon Beane has made a commitment to the trenches on both sides of the ball year after year. And while we can look at the offensive line and kind of by the end of the year feel like we had something clicking there, I don't think he's satisfied with the defensive line as a whole as of right now. So part of my reason for optimism is I don't think he's done there yet. And I don't think this is a spot where we see, some big marquee free agent come in. The Twitter sphere goes crazy for let's make a move for this year. It's Chandler Jones, Hassan Reddick, Von Miller. Last year it was J.J. Watt. I don't think we have the cap room to want to be making the swing at the plate like that. I think you could free up the cap if you wanted to try to make a move like that, but it also hampers everything else you can do. So I think this is going to be a spot where we see them draft defensive line again. We might see a D tackle go. We might see more DNs get brought in. I think this is definitely a position that a set of positions that Brandon Beane isn't done with addressing yet. And when you have some of the glaring weaknesses that we have along that defensive line, and you're still able to have the number one defense in the league, I think the fact that position is still on Brandon Beane's radar, and that's one of the areas that he's really focused on and committed into making better. I don't think he's going to stop until he gets there. And if you can add a legitimate top flight pass rush to this defense, to me it's just awesome and scary to think about what this defense can do as a total unit if you have that bona fide defensive line on the front end. So that's my reason to be excited this week. That's going to wrap it up for tonight's show. Thank you again for joining. Again, we are a show on the Built in Buffalo Network. You can find us on YouTube, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, pretty much anywhere that you're listening to this. You can find more content from us. Our show comes out every Monday, but Built in Buffalo as a network, we got shows 7 days a week. So if you tuned into this show, it wasn't your cup of tea, check out one of the other shows. I guarantee you we got something there that you'd be into. If you ever want to hit us up, we're always looking for guests on the show. You can message me on any social media. You can find me at jgods22. You can find my partner in crime, Andrew. He's on social medias at 2changs. Again, that's going to do it for us tonight. And as always, go Bills!